Okay, so getting on to today's discussion. Let's get on to today's discussion. There's a fascinating letter that's written by Nachmanides. Nachmanides was a good sage, lived from 1194 to 1277, known as the Ramban. Ramban. Has anybody ever heard of the Ramban before? Okay, the Ramban. It's, Hashem. Okay, so the Ramban, let's see if this one works. All right, so the Ramban goes at, no, I'm messing around. All right, so the Ramban basically was a great sage. This is what we call him. It's an acronym. It's an acronym for those who don't read Hebrew, so this says Ramban. The Ramban, it stands for Rabbi Moshe ben Nachman, otherwise known as Nachmanides. Like we mentioned, he lived from 1194 to 1277. All of this is really not relevant, but you know, when you're in a crowd and you hear names, it's like it always feels better when you know things, and I'm able to draw you in more like this, and you listen, you know. So, in any event, he wrote a letter. He wrote many letters. He wrote one very famous letter, which is known as the Igeres HaRamban, the letter of the Ramban. And in the letter of the Ramban, he writes the following statement. Listen to this statement. It's quite interesting. It was very common back in the day when you write letters that you would start the letter with some sort of verse from Tanakh, from the Torah, from the writings, from the prophets. And he started by writing the following. Shema b'ni musar avicha v'al titosh toras imecha. Now, I'm going to tell you the truth. When I walked in this room, I had no idea what I'm talking about. I had nothing in mind. I didn't know what to talk about. I'm thinking, like, what should I say? And then my good friend Mike here, came and he brought it out. Says the verse, Shema b'ni musar avicha ve'al titos toras imecha, which means, listen, my child, to the teachings of thine father. However, forsake not the teachings of thine mother. Now, how do I know that translation? You see, my father was a cantor in Connecticut, and in Fairfield, the Fairfield Home for the Elderly. So what did I do in Yom Kippur? I watched football. But what happens when I couldn't watch football because they chased us out of there or there was no game? I would sit in the sanctuary, the main sanctuary, and there was a stained glass window in the front of the synagogue that said, listen, my child, to the teachings of thine father. However, forsake not the teachings of thine mother. I must have read that sign over 1,000 times. So that's why I know the translation. But that's the verse that the Ramban starts with. And it's a very interesting verse. It's very apropos. You see, there's a question that many of us ask, or maybe we're bothered by. Okay, let's say I'm going to buy into this Judaism thing, okay? Let's even say I'll buy into your Orthodox flavor, perhaps. Let's say I'll say, okay, there's a God, there's an idea called Torah, it's all true, it's all good. But what's with these rabbis? You know, like, what's with all these, like, rabbinical things? I get it, you got Torah law. I got to follow the book. You got the book called the Torah, the Bible. Tells us what we do, what we don't do. I get it. We got our 613 commandments. We got our 365 negative commandments, meaning our don't do's. We got our 248 do's. Okay, which happen to correspond with the Ramach Evarav, the 248 limbs in the body, and the Shesagidah, 365 sinews. Okay, the correspondence of our body and our soul and the commandments, and it comes to one beautiful thing, which we have a connection with God. Beautiful, I get it. But what's with all these rabbinical stuff? You know what I mean? God already told me I can't do this, can't do that, can't do that. Now you got to say, and by the way, you also can't do it. So we've just gone from about 613 commandments to about 613 to the 30th power, right, commandments, right, which is more than a billion, right? So we just up the ante like crazy. Has anyone here ever thought of such a question? Ever wondered such a question, perhaps? Yeah? You're good? You're cool? You feel comfortable? You don't mind the rabbinical things? You're good, D'Rabbanan. You've never heard everyone say, it's only D'Rabbanan. Oh, it does bother you. You just don't want to say it. Okay. So, right, has anyone here ever been bothered by the idea of rabbis? How do you feel? You feel good?
Well,
you're from California. It doesn't count. You're chilling. Right, you're just good to go.
I love learning.
Nice. Okay, what do you got, Mike?
I love learning.
Yeah? So you love restrictions as well? Forgot that part, did you? Yeah, what do you got?
I very much dislike them, and I feel like there's a lot of leniency when it comes to them because...
A lot of?
Leniency.
Go on.
It's like when rules become in place. Like, yeah, Torah comes from God. I believe that, and I love God. And God is, infinite and perfect and all that great stuff. But the rabbinical laws comes from man, and man makes mistakes. And even if man doesn't make mistakes, when man makes a rule, he makes a rule for like maybe a high percentage of a population.
Where do leniencies come in? I missed the leniency part.
Well, it's like
Everything you just said to me sounds like not leniencies.
Well, what I'm saying is when man makes a rule, most times, like more times than none, he makes a rule for a majority of people. You know, the rule is in place for maybe like 60% of people that shouldn't go over this fence because they can't handle the jump, they'll hurt themselves. But then there's like a small percentage of people that could totally jump over this fence and not hurt themselves. Like the rules are put in place for a majority of people, not everybody, but everybody has to follow.
It sounds to me like you've shifted to another issue.
Well, they should be lenient, is what I'm saying.
The lack of leniencies.
Yeah.
You're saying the lack of leniencies, the fact that to put rules upon an entire people when maybe there are people that don't need those rules. Yeah. Is that right? Is that what you're trying to say? You sound very similar to someone I heard about once. His name was King Solomon. Have you ever heard of Solomon before? Do you know where I'm going with this?
Possibly.
Where do you think I'm going?
I don't know.
So why couldn't you say that first?
Because
right, so King Solomon. Okay, King Solomon. King Solomon said exactly what you said. Do you know what he said? King Solomon said, you know, we got these rules, we got these regulations. He took it a step further. He said, even the Torah's rules. You see, why did you go only pick on the rabbinical rules? Why not the Torah rules?
Because the Torah is more of God and more legit.
If God gives a rule, and you don't feel the rule applies to you, why shouldn't you be saying the same thing about that?
I mean, I want to, but I don't want to in this argument because I'd rather you pick me apart for something that I could have more of a chance of arguing myself out of than actual God.
That was honest. That was very honest. Okay, so we're going to put God in the picture here, my friends. Shlomo Melech said, King Solomon, they say Shlomo Melech was Chacham Mikol Adam. He was the wisest of all men. A person who knew, I wouldn't say everything, because he himself said there's something he didn't know. He said, I sought out wisdom. Says Solomon, I sought out wisdom. Vihi rechoka mimeni. But wisdom was far from me. What do you mean wisdom was far from you? I thought you were the most brilliant, the most wise of all men. The sages tell us when he says Vihi rechoka, he's referencing the para aduma, the red heifer. The law of the red heifer. How do they see that? Okay, they understand it. However they do it, it happens also to be the same numerical value of Vihi rechoka and the word para aduma, red heifer. But in any event, he says, I saw it out and it was distant from me. It was distant from me. Meaning, he didn't understand at all the reason for the red heifer was. Does that mean he understood everything else? Seemingly, right? Or at least a lot. And what does he say? He says, you see, the Torah says a person cannot have too many wives. A king is allowed to have many wives. A king's allowed to have 18 wives. Jewish king is allowed to have 18 wives. Chai, right? But you can't have more than 18 wives. And you're not even supposed to have too many wives. And don't have too much money. And don't have too many horses. And the Torah says, why? Don't have too many. You want to say something?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah, go on.
When you're saying that the Torah says that we're not allowed to have too many wives, is that implying that we're allowed to have more than one?
Correct, yes. From Torah law, one is allowed to have more than one wife. From rabbinic law, right? Or it's not really rabbinic law, it's actually an enactment of Rabbeinu Gershom.
Changed what the Torah said.
Yeah, sure. Very much changed it. Or did it? Now, there's a difference between changing something and protecting something. I'm not even pulling a move of I'm not playing word games here. Okay. What I mean, changing something were to be, if the Torah says, you're not allowed to drive in a car on Shabbat, and the rabbi said, you are allowed to drive in Shabbat. That's clearly going against it, right? If the Torah said, you're only allowed to have one wife, and the rabbi said, you're allowed to have many wives, right? That's clearly going against it. If the Torah says you're allowed to have many wives, and the rabbis say only have one wife, that's not saying going against the Torah. The Torah didn't say you must have many wives. The Torah says you're allowed to have many wives. And the rabbi said not to have it. Do you see the difference between going against what the Torah said and setting up something as a protective fence of sorts? Sure. Okay, now whether you agree with this example or not, that's not the point, the idea. So now what happens? Solomon says the following thing. He says, I get it. I know why I shouldn't have too many wives. The Torah tells us the reason not to have too many wives is because a person's going to end up doing idolatry. Don't have too many horses, you're going to end up going back to Egypt. Right? It says the reason. So says Shlomo HaMelech. I'm the wisest of all men. Let's just call a spade a spade. You know what I mean? I am the wisest of all men. I understand the reason. Therefore, since I understand the reason, I should be able to do it. and I won't have a problem because I get the reason and it doesn't apply to me. And guess what happened? He did it. And guess what happened? He did it. And the Torah tells us that he ended up doing, or was tantamount to doing, idolatry. Shlomo Melech, Solomon. Now that requires a lot more research and study to go, and what does it mean he did idolatry, how much, what was he involved with, etc. But the concept is, even Shlomo HaMelech, who's Chacham Mikol Adam, is the wisest of all men, understands the concept that what? Don't be such a wise tush, if I could say it nicely.
Sounds
right?
like you got really arrogant, though.
Okay, I was speaking it out like that, but again, I'm from New York, so right? I'm sure he didn't say it like, I got this, yo. All he was saying is like, okay, here's the reason, I understand it, and that doesn't apply, so therefore, right? And that's essentially what you were saying. Here's the reason, it goes to a certain amount of a section of society, it doesn't apply to me, so therefore. The Gemara tells a story about Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir was one time, there's a law that was enacted that a person is not supposed to read by the light of a candle. On Shabbos, you should not read by the light of a candle on Shabbos. Why should you not read by the light of a candle? In order, lest you come to tilt the candle, right? Now what happens by tilting the candle? By tilting the candle, it brings the fire closer, and what ends up happening? You're violating a Torah prohibition of lighting or igniting a fire. And what happens if you put it back? Then you can extinguish it, or it's extinguishing it by pulling it further away. If you bring something closer to the oil, then you're lighting it. You bring it further away, then you're extinguishing it, lest you come to do that. So there was a rabbi who said, it's okay, I know, I'm good. Therefore I can go and I can read by it because I understand the rule. It doesn't apply to me. What happened? He was reading by the light of the fire. And the Gemara says either he actually ended up doing it, or he ended up almost doing it and someone stopping him. And then he said, wow, praiseworthy are the rabbis, for they don't give us the reason for their decrees. And the question is, what are you talking about? They did give the reason for their decree. So what do you mean when they say that they don't give the reason for their decree? And it's answered that they didn't give all the reasons for their decrees. When the Rabbanan came along and enacted certain decrees and principles and edicts and laws and rules and fences, like we're going to explain in a moment what's going on. We jumped a little bit because of the question, which is great. We're going to go backwards in a minute. When they did these things, and then they gave us reasons, they didn't tell us all the reasons. Why didn't they tell us all the reasons? Because of the smart tushes that would say, I understand them all, they don't apply to me. Generally speaking, the first one to fail is the one who says it doesn't apply to me. Person who thinks, this is like the Mishnah says, Al ta'amin ba'atzmecha ad yom moscha. Don't believe in yourself until the day of death. Now that doesn't mean not to have self-esteem. But that means to say, don't think you're so hot. Don't think, and that's more from an arrogant perspective. I'm saying, but don't think that, even not being arrogant, don't be so sure that you would be able to pass the tests that you think you'd be able to pass. Has anyone here ever done something in their life that they thought they never would have done? So that, for the rest of you not, okay. Do any of you speak English, right? Okay, yeah, so if you've ever done, just that alone is enough to be able to understand that if you've ever done something that you thought you never would have done in any direction, for better or worse, it comes to show, don't think you know yourself so well.
But there's a difference between being confident and cocky,
We're not talking about any arrogance here.
Okay.
Just the way I'm speaking. Put away all the arrogance. Yeah, this is something which is inbred in me, right? Okay. Put aside all the arrogance. Just straight up idea. Give me 1 second. Straight up idea. Understand the fact that you have done things better than you would have thought you would have done, and possibly worse than you thought you ever would have done. And sometimes you think, how did I even get here? Even better or worse? And the answer is that you got there. And when the rabbis come along and they tell us certain things, they are enacting things from a certain understanding that possibly they didn't share with us because of the fact that you need to understand that this is not just for the majority, just for 51%. This is for 90 and maybe even 100% of the people. Yeah, what did you want to say, sir?
I just want to ask a question. Many years ago, I read through about King Solomon, and I just want to make sure I understood it right. That King David had this adulterous relationship where he killed the husband of the woman. Seemingly. Yeah. Oh, well, okay. Anyway, and then the first child died. The first child of that relationship died.
Correct.
And the second child was King Solomon. That was how I understood it, I think, and I wanted to make sure that was right, because it's difficult for me to imagine that God would use such a adulterous relationship to transmit his kingship. It's excellent question. Excellent question.
this is, yes, he had this child Shlomo afterwards, but you have to understand that you're throwing in, you just dropped a bomb, right? You just dropped the bomb.
Yeah, 'cause that's really heavy thing.
No, it's a fantastic question. The commentaries go nuts on this idea. The Talmud speaks about it. It says that anyone who thinks that King David did a sin, Eino Elotoa, you're making a mistake. Yet a couple lines later it says, David HaMelech, King David sinned. Right? What? Right? So did he or didn't he? And that gets into the concept of chut of sa'ara.
Common sense says it's pretty serious sin to kill to betray your husband and kill him the way he did Uriah. King David already had 500 wives, and he has to take this one.
1,000, right?
Kill her husband.
Right. Oh no, that's slow. Right. Very good.
So justify that, you know.
So good. I'm not going to be able to answer your question, and even though you didn't ask this
Well,
part.
the main question was, did I understand it right?
Yes. This is his son. Yeah. That's exactly what happened. So, but let's understand the following. When we come along and speak about David HaMelech, you have to understand the Gemara goes over and over and talks about who was King David, what did he do, where did he come from, what was he involved with, what was going on there. And understand that really Urachiti, if you want to get a little bit deeper, the Gemara in Ksuvah spells out that Urachiti was really chayiv. He was, how do I say it in English, Morid b'malchus. He rebelled against the kingship. And when he rebelled against the kingship, he ended up having to be that he now has to go and be killed. Because when you go against the king, you get killed. But he wasn't killed straight up. He was sent to the front lines of war. And the reality is that when he went out to war, he gave a divorce document to his wife before he went to war. In which case, when King David had a relationship with Bathsheba, she wasn't married at that stage. He gave her a divorce document. So he's saying...
That sounds like the slimiest kind of manipulation.
I understand.
But it's obviously unethical behavior.
So you have to understand the words you just said were very powerful. The slime is when it is clearly unethical. You have to realize we're not dealing here with Torah Shebechsav, my friend. We're not dealing with the written Torah. We're dealing with things which are unbelievably deep. We're talking about the oral Torah. A lot of mistakes that people make when they come involved to Judaism is they look at the Torah, they read through it, and they're like, what the heck? Right? And they're like, I can't believe it said A, B, C. Reading the written Torah and stopping there, I can't think of an analogy, but it's like an analogy. Now, let me try to think of one. That's like a person opening up a 500-page book to page 400 and start reading the storyline without having any other information of what's going on. So you see a guy, and the storyline is, this guy David, he takes Bathsheba, sends the husband Uriah to the front lines of war, gets him killed off, and you're thinking like, what the heck is going on here? King David? What kind of guy is this anyway? My friend, did you read the first 400 pages? And by that, I don't mean the written Torah. I mean, did you understand what's going on behind the scenes? David HaMelech, King David, challenged God. He says, God, why is it that we say in the prayers, Elokei Avram, Elokei Yitzchak, Elokei Yaakov, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob? Why don't we say Elokei David? Why not the God of David? And you have to understand, that already sounds arrogant. But not if we understand in depth what the concept of arrogance and humility really is. They were just coming from a concept of understanding of what he's done. Why? Just let me understand the essence of why we're saying these names, not my name. What did I do? Am I deserving of this? He said, well, I challenged them, I tested them, and they passed the test. He said, okay, give me a test. He's like, you sure? He's like, yeah. So we gave him a test. What was the test? Bathsheba. Now he ended up failing the test. Now why is that failing? I thought she was divorced. So all these things that we're saying now, this is why I'm saying it's like opening up Pandora's box and leaving, right? And just saying, Pandora, have a good time, right? And it says, what's going on? So that's why I'm saying the answer is yes, you are correct in what happened. But to understand a little bit more that perhaps we should have a whole discussion about this, but we have to go step by step with it. So in any event, yes.
I wanted to go back to what you said earlier.
Yeah, I'm going back.
About how, like, when the rabbis created the oral law, the rabbinical law, how they didn't
The rabbinical and not oral.
Rabbinical.
Oral came from Sinai, from the Lord.
Yes. So the rabbinical stuff. So like they didn't necessarily explain things. Like they put them in a place they don't want to explain things.
Some things yes, some things no. Some
Yeah,
things
so that,
info.
so within these laws and restrictions, I feel like with the lack of understanding, you know, people try to find all these loopholes that are technically not like breaking the rules, but totally go by the meaning behind them. And I feel like understanding why a rule is in place is extremely important for having the connection or like really, really benefiting from the rule itself. Because if you don't understand why you're doing something, you may be not really connecting to why you're supposed to do it in the first place.
Correct. Listen, if you have a child
Yeah.
and you set up a rule for that child, okay, don't do ABC. And you explain to them the reason why, and it really is the reason, but they're a child.
Yeah.
So they're going to argue with you, they're going to fight with you, they're going to say it's not true. You say, go to sleep. And they say, why? Because if not, you're going to be cranky in the morning. And they go, no, I won't. I won't be cranky, right? Well, you are now, right? And it says, next morning, what happened? So you try to explain to them. Do they agree with you? No. You know a little bit more than that, right? You understand a little bit more than that. So what happens is you say to them, you know why you should go to sleep? You should go to sleep now because it's really not healthy for a person to stay up too late. It's just not good for your body. It's good for you to get a certain amount of rest in order that your metabolism works properly, in order that you're able to digest things. Is everything I just said true? It's all true also. I'm not lying. I'm going to give them a reason. And also, you're going to be energized. You're going to have power to be able to. You want your friend to come over tomorrow? You want to play with them? I mean, it would be great. You want to play soccer? He's going to beat you. He's going to beat you. You don't want to lose in soccer. Right? So teach them competition. Right? No. So I did whatever it is. You show them. It's all true what you're saying. And it's something which they can hear and perhaps go with. If I tell them the real reason you're going to be cranky, they're not going to listen to me. They're going to fight with me.
Maybe not the first or second time,
Ew.
but if they actually really want to benefit from the rule and they realize the negative effect that it has, and they're a smart enough person, they'll learn. I used to work at a daycare center.
You don't have children.
No, but I used to work at a daycare center.
Yeah.
I used to because I was a bad kid growing up. So at this daycare center, I was dealing with a lot of kids that were just like me, and it was a completely mind-blowing experience because I didn't realize how difficult of a kid I actually was until I was put in that situation. However, one of the mistakes that people made with me, at least, when I was growing up as a kid,
They didn't let you realize yourself.
They want to give me reasons. They just be like, do this, do that, and I'd fight with them because it didn't make sense in my mind.
And there are certain times you do that, and there are certain times you don't. You go to the kid, take medicine. Let's make it more clear for you. And the kid goes, I don't want to. You say, but it tastes good. Let's say it does. Cherry flavored. It tastes good. The kid's like, I like cherry. Have it. No, explain it to them. The kid's like, I don't want to. I don't want to take it. Well, don't you understand what happens? It fights the white blood cells that are attacking your body, in which case now you'll be able to survive. If you don't take it, you might end up dying. No, let me see for myself. Then they die. You understand? So the example I gave first, you're right, but now we're talking about a little more extreme here. Get it?
Don't you think that there's some kids out there that would actually understand and then be like, oh, you're right?
For some things, yes. For some things, no. Which is why there are times where we do have decrees that are enacted that are absolved and taken away. You have to know when and how. This is not just like, oh, Judaism, whatever. This is very, very, very intricate. Every part of it's thought out and put into for a purpose, for a reason.
And I very much agree. But even something like us not being allowed to play music on Shabbat, where I just found out that if I'm a professional drummer, I'm not allowed to drum on the table on Shabbat because that's what I do for a living. And that's a technicality, but then everybody else that doesn't drum as a profession is totally okay to drum on a table. For me, music on Shabbat is beneficial to who I am.
I love this.
And I know you agree with me too, even if you won't say it. I know, because as a musician, I know you've had times where you just want to play your guitar and do something musical on Shabbat.
I have a lot of responses. I'm going to go a little bit further. The first response is the following idea. Hey, I don't believe you're a musician if you're telling me that you've never tuned an instrument without paying attention. I don't believe you. You're not a musician if you didn't tune an instrument.
And I completely agree.
Oh.
I have paid very much.
So now you understand exactly what I'm talking about. Why are you not allowed to play an instrument on Shabbos, lest you come to fix the instrument, which is a Torah law?
Watch this one.
So you're telling me that what's going to happen, you're like, I don't get it. It doesn't make any sense to me. It makes perfect sense to you. You're going to come to do it. You understand the Torah laws, right? We agreed with that. So what are you talking about? That's number one. Number two, my response to you is the fact, which I didn't want to say, but I'll say, it's interesting, Tosos of Beitzu, which says that maybe it's not even true with the drumming thing anymore, but we'll talk about it after. Number three is the idea I want to respond is to say, oh, come on, my Shabbos is just going to be better if I go ahead and I do this. This is what, listen carefully to this claim. This is a huge claim. And everyone has to listen carefully to the following idea. If I didn't say listen carefully, then you don't have to listen carefully. If I just say listen, then listen without care. But now that I said carefully, make sure there's care involved. Okay, here we go. When a person goes and says the following, I love Shabbos or Shabbat, same holiday. I love it. Getting together with family, it's just such a nice thing. And I understand there's an idea that you shouldn't drive on Shabbos, right? There's an idea that you've heard of such a thing, Mike, right? People shouldn't be driving on Shabbos. Heard of such a thing? Yeah, you know what I'm talking about? Don't drive on Shabbos. I ain't going to work on Saturday. Get the idea, I ain't going to drive on Shabbos. But my grandmother, she lives across town. And what would Shabbos be like without my grandmother? Surely God wants me to go pick up my grandmother and bring her back to my home on Friday night. I know you're going to say I could do it before Shabbos, but it just didn't work out. So now it's Friday night and grandma's not with us. What kind of Shabbos is that? Clearly God doesn't want me to suffer like that. Therefore, let me go do that. Anybody hear what just happened? Does anyone ever hear somebody say that? Now let's think about that for a second, okay? What? Yeah, clearly God wants me to pray in a shul, so it's far, I'm gonna drive. That's what God wants from me, right? Clearly God wants me to have hot food on Shabbos, and the power blew, so he wants me to turn the power back on. I mean, I won't do it after that, but once it's on, then we'll just... Clearly he wants me to heat up the food in the microwave. Now let's think this through. Your girlfriend says to you, your spouse says to you, your husband or wife, whichever you are, right, says to you, I would like you to pick me up. And I'll give you a perfect example of myself. My wife says, I want you to be done by 1 o'clock. Okay? Not today because I'm not teaching right till 1, but let's say I want you to be done by 1 o'clock, and then please come home. I need you to be home by 1:30. I get home at 1:45. Why? Because I stopped on the way home to get milk, because clearly she would want milk in the house. I stopped on the road to buy her flowers. Clearly she would want flowers. I stopped on to get her chocolate. Clearly she would want chocolate. Now you know what? Some woman would buy that. My wife said, I told you 1:30. I said, yeah, but I got milk. Got milk? Right? And she says back, lovely that you got milk. I'm happy you have milk, but I needed you here at 1:30. We are smarter than God. We think we're smarter than our wives. And let me tell you something. You're not. Yeah? So we think that we are smarter. If you're married, you know what I'm talking about. If you're not, you're going to learn it soon. We think that we are smarter. We know more than God. God, I know you said don't do this, but really what you mean, is you mean you want me to be doing something else. You want me to play music because that's going to increase my Shabbos. You want me to, and those rabbis, it's not even you, God, it's the rabbis. What's going on here? Comes along a verse in Deuteronomy, 5th book of the Torah, chapter 17, verse 11. And says God, I want you to listen to the rabbis. So now, no longer is this now a rabbinic thing. It's actually a machlokes Ramban, whether or not a person violates it or violating the Torah, says the Rabbanan. But now, no longer is this just a rabbinical thing. But now this has become a Torah thing. God says, I want you to do 613 commandments. I also want you to listen to the rabbis. Now, who are the rabbis? I'm not talking about modern day, although people can extend. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the times of the Talmud, and the times of the closing, and the times of the Anshe Knesset Gedolah, and the Great Assembly, when we had what's known as the Beis Din, the times of the temple. That's what I'm talking about. When we had this concept of the Rabbanim, of the Shoftim, of the times of the people of the time, the leaders of the time. God says, I want you to listen to them. Lo sasar min hadavar, don't sway, 17:11, Deuteronomy. Don't sway from that which they tell you, neither left nor right. Now, if you want to know more, you got to start really from verse 1, because then you'll get the flow of what's happening. But in 11 is where it spells it out. All right, so we have over here, God himself, God Almighty saying, V'asu mishmeres l'mishmarti, and make a guarding to my guarding. What is more beloved to God? You know what's more beloved to God when you follow a rabbinic law than if you even follow a Torah law? Why is that? How does that make any sense? I'll tell you how it makes sense. It is more beloved to the Lord when a person follows a rabbinic thing than when they follow a Torah thing itself. What do I mean by that? But it depends which type. Because generally speaking, the idea of rabbinic, I really have to take even a step further back because we really jumped too far. What is the idea when I say, listen, my child, to the teachings of thine father, however, forsake not the teachings of thine mother? It is explained that the father is referencing God and the rabbis are referencing the mother. The father tells you one thing, listen, my child, to the teachings of God, of thine father. However, forsake not, don't forsake the teachings of your mother. Who are the mother? The rabbis. So I brought down in a book called Letter for the Ages, which is written on the Ramban's letter. The letter of the Ramban. If you don't have it, I recommend you get it. I don't make any money off this yet. but one day maybe. But I highly recommend it. One of my top 3 best books on my list, at least. I mean, besides the Torah. Right? But after that, we have this book called The Letter of the Ramban and The Letter for the Ages. In his introduction to the book, Rabbi Fuhrer, I believe is his name, he says that, imagine you have a kid, and this kid loves food. This kid loves food. Me. Kid loves food. And one day on Main Street, 2nd Avenue, Central, wherever you live, something has got to be there, right? One day, a new restaurant opens up. It's called Joe's Fatty Fatty Fat Pig, right? We got a PHATs in there. He's like fat, right? A lot of FATs, gordo. But we got a lot of things going. Joe's Fatty Fat Pig, fat pig, eat like a pig. Right? That's what it's called. The father comes home and says, son, you better not go to that restaurant. It's not kosher. No eating in that restaurant. Joe's fatty, fat, PHAT, gordo, eat like a pig. No eating in that restaurant. You hear me, boy? You hear me? Yes, Dad. About 10 minutes later, the mother walks in and says, son, if I even see you within a block of that restaurant, you're going to get the whooping of a lifetime.
But Mom, Dad already said I can't go there. Why you got to be like that?
What's the answer? That very often the rabbinical laws that are coming up are not laws in order just to make our lives miserable. Like, hey, rabbis, let's come up with another one. Watch this. No, there are rules that are enacted in order that we don't fall to the Torah law, that we don't crumble, that we don't do the wrong thing. We set up a fence. We set up a boundary. That's what the Mishnah Pirkei Avos, the very first Mishnah says. V'asu siag l'Torah. Interesting. Make a fence for the Torah. Who are the ones who said that? The Anshe Knesset HaGedolah, men of Great Assembly. Make a fence for the Torah, because if you don't make a fence for the Torah, what ends up happening? Baby going down, 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 down. Niagara Falls, Niagara Falls. Right? You're going to fall. I'm talking about now, they finally started putting things on, right? It used to be people just jumped off in barrels, right? Niagara Falls. Now they put up some sort of fence. It took them a while, but they got it. The idea is that the greater the fall, the greater the fence. Make sense? Small little creek, small little fence or no fence. A little bit bigger, a little bit more. Where we can start to see already what the severity is based on the fact that the fences that are set up. Okay, now that we understand that concept of what's happening, that the rabbis are setting up these fences that are going on in order to, what was it, where was I at that I just went back?
Why is it better to keep our own body?
Ah, thank you so much. Why is it better to keep the rabbinic? So comes along, I don't know who, me. It says the following. He says the pasuk, make a guarding for my guardings. God says don't do X. God says don't do X. Let's say don't go here. Rabbis say don't even go here. What does that say? If you don't even go into this zone, what are you saying by not going there?
That you're not even tempting yourself to go into the X.
Essentially, give me another thing. What are you saying?
You value the Torah law.
What's that?
You value the Torah law.
It's saying you value this so much that you don't want to, heaven forbid, fall to this thing. A person who sets up, I'll give you an example. If someone puts an alarm system on their house, and they put dogs there, and they put a tank in the front, and they build a wall, and there's electric wiring all around, and they have barbed wire,
And Snickers.
and they live in South Africa, right? Now, what do you think is in that house?
Something valuable.
Something valuable. Jews. Oh gosh, that's horrible. Right? What do you think? What do you think is in the house? Obviously, if they went through so much effort to set up boundaries, they must really feel this thing is valuable. Make sense? Mm-hmm. When a person goes ahead and cares for the rabbinic laws of don't touch this, and they recognize, and they know, and they realize, and they see, can't touch this, and they come to realize that I'm not even going to get close to it. What does that say about their love for the Torah itself? Everybody hear that? The rabbinical laws are not here to make us suffer. They're not here to make us, that too. It's there to protect. It's there to help you. You say, well, I'm not going to fall to that. Shlomo Melech said the same thing, and we learned from Shlomo Melech such an idea, that don't be smarter than you are. Al tamim ba'atzcha yom moscha. Don't believe in yourself till the day of death. When we have a law that's coming along, realize that that law is there for a purpose. Realize that that law is there for a reason. Now, I want to just make clear something, because a lot of times there's misunderstandings as when I see in some people when they ask questions about the idea of what is rabbinical law altogether. Right? There's different categories. We'll start off with this. The following is like, I'm going to put it into 3 different categories. There's probably more than 3. I'll put it into 3. Number 1 is what we call Torah law. Number 2 is what we call Torah law, as taught through what we'll call rabbis, rabbi. Number 3 is what we call rabbinical law. Okay, now allow me to explain. The mistake that sometimes we make is that, okay, the written Torah is from God, and the oral Torah is from the rabbis. You're half right. And maybe even 3/4 right. The written Torah is from God through Moshe, through Moses. The oral Torah was given at the same time as the written Torah by God to Moses. Then how can we have in the Talmud so many things? This rabbi said that, this rabbi said that, the rabbi learned this. That's just showing you where we learn things out from. In the Talmud, the rabbis will come and show you where do we learn that the law that was taught on Sinai of oral tradition X, where do we see that even in the written Torah, where is it alluded to? Because everything comes from the written Torah, but it's expounded, elaborated, elucidated, and made clear through the concept of the oral tradition. So therefore, when they say these things are going in oral Torah is on the same level as rabbinic, as Torah itself. When it's here, it's not the rabbis. Then we have another level. Right, so this is what I would call written, and this one I would put as oral. Right, we got written and we got oral. Oral Torah is not the rabbis. It is deoraisa, it is Torah law, coming from the same as like the written Torah. Then we have rabbinical. What's rabbinical? Rabbinical are the laws, now they add on, so to speak. Oh, but I thought the verse says in the Torah, you're not allowed to add to the Torah, and you're not allowed to subtract to the Torah. I'll just first point out that it's interesting that everyone complains when we start adding to the Torah, but no one complains when we subtract. In any event, right? You're not allowed to add, you're not allowed to subtract. And that's true, you're not allowed to add or subtract from the Torah. But one is allowed to add a rabbinical law. The problem would be if they say that we are now adding a law and this is a Torah law. That's a problem. But to add a law and say that this is not a Torah law, this is a rabbinical law in order that you not fall to the Torah law, that's totally fine. Where do we find the mistake that was made? I think we spoke about this recently. Where do we find the mistake that was made? That somebody thought something was a Torah law, but really it was just a rabbinical law. And because they thought it was a Torah law when it was really a rabbinical law, it caused a massive problem in Judaism. Adam and Eve. What happened with Adam and Eve? Adam says to Eve, God says to Adam, don't eat from the tree. Adam then goes to Eve and says, don't eat from the tree and don't even touch the tree, lest you die. Did God say that? God never said that. Adam added that. Now, is there a problem to add it? No, as long as he would have said. And I am adding, don't even touch it, because if you touch it, then it will lead to you possibly eating it and then you will die. The fact that Adam didn't explain that, what ended up happening, comes along the snake. Snake goes ahead. I know he's misunderstood, but the snake comes along and he trips Eve into the tree. She touches the tree. She doesn't die. She's like, oh, I didn't die. I must be able to eat the tree itself, right? And that ended up, now we know the rest is unfortunately present.
Which is why it's important to explain them.
Which is why it's important to make clear what's Torah and what's rabbinic.
Yeah. But like earlier you said, like they don't explain the rabbinical law.
Sometimes you don't need to, as long as I tell you this is rabbinic though. Why will it come in handy to know something is rabbinic and not even know the reason for it, then I have to keep it anyway? The answer is because rabbinical law was a lot easier to work with than Torah law. What I mean by that is, if there's a reason, for some reason that's going on that we need to do something that would be breaking rabbinical law, we have a lot more leeway than we do to break a Torah law. Give me one moment to explain this and we'll go on, and then I'll take it. So rabbinical law is what? The concept where they add on afterwards, but where it's very clear, this is rabbinical law. Allow me to give you an example, now you can understand what I'm talking about. It says in the Torah, number one. In number one, it says 3 times, Lo sivashel gedi b'chalei v'imo. Thou shalt not cook a kid and its mother's milk. Got it? Lo tivashel gedi b'chalei v'imo. You're not allowed to cook a kid. No carne con leche. Right? Okay, you can't, well, at least, right? How do you say it again? At least? At least. Al menos? Al menos cocin. Right? Okay, so you can't cook a kid in his mother's milk. That's number one. Number two, come among the rabbis and the Talmud and they explain why does it say it 3 times? Echad le'isar bishul, echad le'isar achila, echad le'isar hana'ah. So he goes and it says, for example, 3 times, don't cook. Don't cook. Kid in mother's milk. Come along the rabbis and explain, why is it there 3 times? 1 time it's coming to tell you that you're not allowed to cook milk and meat together. Number 2, you are not allowed to eat milk and meat that was cooked together. Number 3, you're not allowed to derive benefit from milk and meat that was cooked together. Everybody with me so far? Okay. By Torah law, is a Jew allowed to go to culinary school if they will be cooking milk and meat together? Even if they never eat it. There is a Torah prohibition to cook milk and meat together. By Torah law, is one allowed to eat milk and meat that was cooked together? If you have a dog or a cat, I mean actually, I don't mean like your little brother that you call that. Well, let's say you have a dog or a cat and you give them dog food or cat food. If the dog food or cat food is a type of food that was made through a mixture of milk and meat that was cooked together, are you allowed to feed it to Fido? The answer is one is not allowed to derive benefit from milk and meat that was cooked together. Feeding your dog is deriving benefit.
Profession is deriving.
Say again?
Like doing it as a profession is also deriving.
Doing profession?
Doing it as a profession, like going to culinary school.
Right, exactly. I mean, forget it. Even if you get no benefit from that, there's just the prohibition of cooking it itself, even if you get no benefit. Okay, now, my friends, what we just said right now is Torah law. I have a question for you. Let's see, test your knowledge. Mike, just because you're my buddy today, hopefully it will continue. Mike, is there a Torah prohibition? Question mark.
Yes.
Okay, good. Now, that started easy. Now for $6,000. Now, really not for that, by the way, just to make that clear. Okay, now, is there a Torah prohibition for a man or a woman who's Jewish to have a beautiful T-bone steak with a nice cold glass of chocolate milk? Chocolate milk. I'm not talking about that fake chocolate. I mean milk, chocolate milk. Is there a prohibition to have a steak with a nice glass of milk, chocolate milk? What do you say?
No.
What? What?
Yes.
By Torah law.
No.
Why not?
Yes.
Why, yes. Is that your final answer? Would you like to phone a friend?
Yeah, I would.
Who would you like to phone?
Who wants to be phone? I'll be phone.
Oh, there you go. Hit it. Is there a prohibition for me to have a nice steak and a cup of milk together?
Prohibition was for milk and goat meat.
Oh, says the Talmud. Negative. We're talking about, but that was close. That was an interesting. You knew a little more than you should have over there. Good. It's talking about any milk, not just the mother's milk, and not only goats. Any type of, well, really kosher milk. Kosher milk is what it comes from. If it's not kosher milk, it's another story. Kosher milk. What do you say? Yes or no? Torah prohibition. Yes. No.
Maybe.
Maybe.
Only boiling the milk for the calf in his mother's milk, that's the only thing that Torah really says.
Were you with me for the past 10 minutes?
I snoozed it a little bit.
Okay, as long as you got a good rest. So we spelt that out. Now that's not so, but I'm going to have to keep going for a minute. Anyone? Torah prohibition, yes or no? Answer is?
No. I'm not cooking.
Say?
I'm not cooking them together.
Let's start again. Number 1, there's a prohibition to cook milk and meat together, regardless of the mother's milk or if it's someone else's milk, as long as it's kosher milk, no matter what animal it is, assuming it's kosher. Number 2, you are not allowed to eat milk and meat that was cooked together. Number 3, you're not allowed to derive benefit from milk and meat that was cooked together. Are you allowed to have a steak and a cold glass of milk?
No.
From Torah law? Answer is, are you cooking it together?
No.
So are you allowed to have it by Torah law?
Yes.
Do you get it?
Yeah.
Everything we said over there, you're only not allowed to do it if it's cooking it together. Everyone's thinking like, yes, I thought this was a problem. Now comes number 3. Number 3 is, on the board, rabbinical, right? Blue 3. Blue, number 3. Hut. What's the idea of blue 3? Rabbinical. Come along the rabbis. And they said, you're not allowed to have milk and meat together, even if they're not cooked together. Rabbinical law. Does everybody see clearly now? But an example of where we have Torah, the rabbinic explaining how it's Torah, i.e. any animal that's kosher, any milk that's kosher, through eating, cooking, or benefiting. And then we have rabbinical, of you're not allowed to eat them. You have to wait after having meat. You're supposed to wait 6 hours till you have milk. You're not allowed to eat them at the same time. That is a rabbinic nature. Now, I think this is an example which is pretty clear to understand. It's not crazy that if a person starts eating them together, that they may come to cook them together. Right? It's very common. You're not eating something, you want to just heat it up. You put it back to heat it up. Right? This is why you're not allowed to have it. You're not allowed to do it together. Right? Okay, so we have now come to just show an example of these ideas. Yeah, what you got, baby? You want to say something before? Yeah.
So like earlier, like you did the small circle and the big circle.
Yeah.
Like why we should not do that. But 2 things actually. One, you had a class. You once said about like knowing what you're good at, and like it comes from Hashem, like gifts and stuff like that,
That's right.
and like thanking.
Humility and arrogance,
and stuff
right?
like that. So like if you I feel like it takes a lot more skill to be within the circle of rabbinical law and not touch the Torah law. Now I can understand why it would you would be more beloved by God if you just want to go there anyway, because it means that you trust everything and you just don't even want to go near it. But if you can live a life following the Torah and then going within the rabbinical law, that's even more of a skill than
following the Torah and going within rabbinical law, and yet being in the circle. How does that make sense?
Well, I mean, because there's certain.
Are you out of the circle or in the circle?
You're in the circle of rabbinical law.
Okay.
And
Are you here, or are you number 7 or number 42?
7.
Okay, you're in 7. If you're in 7, that means you're already you're not within rabbinical law.
Yeah, that's what I meant to say.
Okay. So you're saying, isn't it better to live a life here, but not fall to this?
Not better. I feel like if it takes more skill.
Great.
Therefore,
Doesn't
if
it?
you're confident enough in your skill to do so, then you should be able to do so. Not being arrogant, not putting yourself.
Shlomo Melech, I don't understand what you're saying. I'm confused.
It takes to be more accurate with your precision in terms of
And is the goal to get to that? Is that the goal? Is the goal to get to more accurate of precision, or is the goal to listen to God?
It's your goal to listen to God, but if you happen to have that skill, like for instance, if you're a marksman and you're shooting like a target, you can totally shoot.
I hear you. Even smaller and more dangerous and whatever, because you're fine. I saw a guy who does that, crazy archer. It was on YouTube, amazing video about this guy who's, shoots like on the move. He holds 3 at a time. You saw that? He split an arrow when it was coming at him. As it was shooting at him, he went up to robbing him. Hey, crazy stuff. But my question to you is still the same question. Nothing has changed.
Okay.
If I understand you correctly, all you are telling me is, I don't know why you're saying not better. If it's not better, then why are you doing it?
Well, even if I'm wrong, the second thing that I want to say, let's say I'm completely wrong with what I'm saying.
Yeah.
During the times that rabbinical laws were in place, like you said, it's not now, not every rabbi is really knows what he's saying necessarily.
We have them still in place today.
Yeah, of course, but even back in the day, there was corruption within the temple and rabbis, and it was very political. There was.
I'm not sure what you're talking about. You're probably talking about the Second Temple era when they had people that would buy in to these things, right? Yeah, we are previous to that thing. Previously on Talmud. All right, you're talking about a time when it was bad news, and the Second Temple was really very much lacking than what the First Temple had. We didn't really have a Shos Hashchina. We didn't have the sacrifices that were just we were lacking a lot of the miracles that occurred in the first one. The first one was a pristine idea of what was going on. That's when we had the ideas of what's happening. Even after that, we still had the men of great assembly. So even in the Second Temple era, which we are also inclusive of, we're talking about people. We knew who these people are. They had people called Saddukim, Sadducees, and others that had their own groups that they changed certain things. Yeah, and we know who they are, and we know what they said, and we say differently. And we enacted a lot of things because of them. A lot of things happened because of them. So if you're going to tell me that maybe, perhaps, something slipped in, whatever, okay, I'm even willing to hear that. Great, what could you do? The reality is we're not perfect. Nothing's perfect. We can only do as much as we can do. In which case we take whatever it is.
Rabbinic law is pre-Second Temple?
Rabbinic law it's both. It's second. It's really ultimately the men of great assembly were ending by the time of the Second Temple, right? That's when there were a lot of things that were enacted and put into play. And I'm about to get shot by a rabbi, so I have to leave right now. But people, join us next time on Essentials. I'm going to run the opposite way so I don't get harmed physically.